people, welcome. Today's video is all about other people's memories, what they remember about times gone by and how difficult times were and what they did to survive. I worked in social care, elderly social care, for 30 years of my working life, and that gave me the privilege of being able to spend a lot of time with the older generations. I was brought up spending a lot of time with my grandma, or my nana as she was called. So I always had an affinity for older people. And I could sit and listen for hours to their wisdoms and wise words and warnings and stories and tales they could tell me. It was always fascinating because there's something very soothing and very calm about an older person, and they would always have my full attention. The topics often would be how they had struggled as younger people, or how they had to make do and mend or stretch what they had. Because up until the early 1980s, we didn't have an excess of anything. So these generations of people really were careful with everything. And here is a few of their extreme frugal tips I do remember we've discussed in the past, and things that either surprised me or delighted me or amazed me because I was used to the mod cons and the easiness and the convenience of life we know today. So I won't waste any more time with my Yorkshire waffle, and we will start with the extreme frugal tips from times gone by. A very common comment and discussion was how difficult washing clothes and towels and bedding was historically compared to how it is now, with the all singing and dancing washing machine and spinner, and in some cases, washer dryer. Hand washing clothes was very common, done in a large bowl or even in the bath with a bar of soap or a bar of washing soap, and rinsing in the cold water and wringing out by hand. Now, if it was a large item, you'd need two people to wring out the item to get as much rid of as much water as possible. So, say it was a large towel, one person would stand at each end of the towel, and they'd hold the towel and each twist in opposite ways. This would be outside or over the bath, so all the water could drain off, or a lot of the water could drain off. And then the item would be hung up to dry, whether if it was a decent day outside, it would be hung on the washing line because everybody dried clothes outside. If not, it probably would be brought in and hung over a bath, or even in some cases in a kitchen over a stove for it to dry wherever the warmest part of the house was. You can imagine it wouldn't take many items of washing for your hands to become very chapped from the cold, from any chemicals that we're using to wash the clothes. It was probably very common occurrence for chilblains too. I was told that petroleum jelly was used to put on to soothe chapped hands, but also even cold pig's fat was used to soothe chapped hands. Anything that gave the skin a little bit of waterproofing against the cold water that they was going to be using. Nappies were usually white terry toweling cotton, and they would have to be soaked in cold water separately before they were hand washed because obviously they would get stains on them. And a really good way to dry nappies was on the washing line outside in summer because the sun would naturally bleach the stains and the nappies white again. If any of you have had children, you'll know, you can quite imagine what an arduous job this is with the amount of nappies they would probably go through every day. Fabric and reusable nappies are actually making a comeback. The fabrics and the covers are so much easier to use nowadays, and the liners and things, than they used to be in times gone by. But they are actually a great way to save you money and save a mass of excess dirty plastic nappies going to landfill. I do remember quite a few conversations, generally with the old gentlemen, about how they would use scraps of metal and wood to make their children presents for Christmas and birthdays. And what was very popular was homemade go-karts or buggy carts, and they would very often use old pram wheels, scraps of wood, cut plastic bowls, even make a wooden seat or a seat out of an old fruit box, and some rope to steer the front wheels. If dad or granddad was very lucky, he might be able to get a honking horn from a scrap merchant or out of the bits and bobs that are in his shed. Bikes would also be made from scraps of old bikes that were either bought from the scrap man or had been made from an old bike that dad or granddad may have had. And literally, a child's Christmas present bike could be an amalgamation of 5 or 6 other bikes that had all gone to rack and ruin. And they were absolutely adored and appreciated by the children, A, because they didn't get that much stuff, so what they did get, they really appreciated, and B, being outside in the fresh air, going as fast as you can on your go-kart or your bike. There was nothing better in the olden days if you was a kid. Brushing your teeth with coal dust wasn't unheard of when people didn't sort of have access to toothpaste, etc. The coal dust would act as an abrasive to clean the teeth, and of course, the blackness of the coal would make teeth look whiter just by the contrast. You can now buy charcoal toothpaste over the counter. Again, because it's a mild abrasive, it makes the teeth look whiter. But also, what works is the charcoal helps to absorb the smelly sulfur compounds of plaque around your teeth and things. So it ticks a lot of boxes. So they actually started the trend many decades ago using coal dust for toothpaste or tooth powder, and we're still using it now. Another toiletry that was made by people that really had very little was rose petals in the garden were used to make rose scented cologne. Very often, children would make the rose scented perfume with the petals, but a few big fat rose leaves left in some water for a few days, just slightly crushed, and you get a most beautiful smelling rose water. It didn't keep for very long, but it was a way for making cheap perfume. Used tea and onion skins were also used for dyeing wool or cotton. If you've ever dyed anything with an onion skin or soaked an onion skin in water for a period of time, you get a beautiful dark rich dye, and it does actually stain. And you can also use walnut shells, so two very natural dyes that make a beautiful brown. Scraps, leftover scraps, so they're free and they work. And just like you had the go-karts and the bikes made from old bits and bobs, ragdolls were very similar. They were actually put together out of rags, stuffed with old rags, and just made looking really visually pretty, aesthetically pretty, for the child that would be receiving them. They were very often well loved and cuddled because they were so soft and squishy, and again, made entirely from bits of waste and scraps of fabric. More for scrap ends to be used was the scrap end stock, which would include old veggie scraps, meat burns, onion skins, potato skins, even carrot tops, and they'd all be boiled up in a pan, left to stew, and then after they'd been simmering for a couple of hours, the stock would be removed from the vegetation and the burn matter, and the stock would be used to make soups and stews. As you can imagine, it was full of vitamins and minerals and really quite tasty. Another thing which never went to waste could really be your waste, and that was urine could be used for the garden. The nitrogen in urine is very good for some plants. I do remember one gentleman telling me about how they would, in his household, soak their feet if they had very hard skin in bowls of warm urine for 10 minutes, and then the skin would just peel off on the heel very, very easily. And when you actually look at the ingredients in normal foot creams, urea is very often an ingredient that's quite high up, and urea is in urine. I think it's more likely to be a synthetic one in the foot creams now, but it really is good at conditioning the skin. If you had mint plant in the garden, not only would you use chopped up fresh mint sauce for your meat just to add a little bit more flavour, you'd also maybe chew a mint leaf if you had indigestion to help with the symptoms. Treats for children would be things like a piece of fruit. So if you had two children, you had one apple, the fruit would be chopped in half. You would never waste more than one piece of fruit. It had to go around and it had to last. Sweets would be once a week maximum. Bread and jam was considered a great treat. Fruitcake, cream, and trifle were considered luxury items and only brought out for special occasions such as Christmas and birthdays, maybe even Easter. Nicely scented or luxurious soaps, once they'd been dried out in airing cupboards so they last longer, could maybe be popped into a drawer or a wardrobe. Also, they would use a lavender bag, and this helped keep moths away from your clothes and also kept clothes smelling fresh. As you can imagine, a lot of houses would smell damp just because of the lack of heating, the lack of central heating, windows being closed to keep the cold out. So it wouldn't take long for condensation and that smell of damp to arise. And things that smelt nice, like a bar of soap or lavender, would just help be a little bit of a tonic so the clothes and fabric didn't absorb all that smell of damp. And it wasn't the first thing when you put an item of clothing on that you could smell. And I know we think nowadays, especially with the cost of energy, that we have it bad. But I remember one little old gentleman telling me that when he was a young lad, he was only 4 or 5, just after the coalman had been to do all his deliveries. If his family couldn't afford coal that week or that month, whenever the delivery was, he was sent up the street after the coalman to collect any bits of coal that dropped off the wagon as he was doing his deliveries. There were many hard days, and there may be many more to come, but we will get through this the best we can by having a sense of community, by being part of this great community, by sharing tips and wisdoms and friendships and kind words and good thoughts. That's it for today. We'll be back very soon with more videos. Certainly, really enjoying looking back into the past because there's just so many fantastic tips, frugal ideas, extremities that we would never dream of doing, but people in times gone by have had to do. If you like our content, please like, share, subscribe, and we'll see you soon. Have a great day. Bye for now.